My name is Simone Adler. I am 32 years old. And the evening my sister stood in my kitchen and told me that $60,000 was just an investment in family was the evening I finally understood that the people who call your refusal heartless have usually spent years counting on you not to refuse. She said it the way people say things they have been rehearsing in the car on the drive over.
$62, Simone.
It's an investment in family. My mother was standing at the edge of my kitchen, near the counter where I keep the coffee maker. She had her arms crossed loosely, not defensively, just the way she stands when she has already decided something and is waiting for the room to catch up. If you loved her, she said, you'd do it. My father was behind her, closer to the hallway. He said, you and your boundaries. He said it the way you say a word that belongs to someone else, borrowing the shape of it to use as a dismissal. I looked at my sister Vera. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father, who had his keys still in his hand because they had arrived together, which meant this had been coordinated before they walked through my door. I said, no. One word. I did not add to it. I did not explain it or soften it or follow it with an offer of something smaller. I said no, and I stood in my own kitchen with my hands at my sides, and I waited. My mother said I was not to come home for the holidays. My father said nothing further. He put his keys in his pocket. Vera looked at me for a moment, a long, considering look, and then she picked up her bag from my kitchen table and they left. I heard the front door close. I stood in my kitchen for a moment. Then I walked to the sink and ran the water cold and put both hands under it, not for any reason except that it was something to do with my hands. What none of them knew, standing in my kitchen with their coordinated certainty, was that 2 months before that evening I had filed the paperwork to incorporate a company. The LLC certificate was in a folder in the second bedroom I had converted into an office. The company had, at that point, one client and $14,200 in its first quarter billing. I had told no one. I had not been ready to tell anyone. I understand now that I was also, without fully articulating it, protecting something fragile from the particular weight of my family's attention. 3 years later, that company had 11 employees. My sister was one of the people who applied for position 12. But let me tell you who Simone Adler was before that kitchen, because the woman who said no did not arrive there without a reason. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, the younger of 2 daughters. My parents, Ingrid and Paul Adler, had met at a state university in the 1980s, married young, and built a life that was organized around pragmatism and a particular kind of family loyalty that expressed itself less as warmth and more as expectation. My father worked in commercial insurance. My mother managed the office of a pediatric dental practice for 20 years. They were not unkind people. They were people who had a clear internal map of how things should go and who experienced deviation from that map as a kind of personal weather event, something to be corrected rather than understood. Vera was 5 years older than me and had always been the one my parents organized themselves toward. Not because they loved her more, I don't think it was that simple, but because Vera required organization. She was energetic and creative and perpetually mid-project, and my parents had spent decades in the pleasant occupation of helping her manage the gap between her ambitions and their outcomes. I was the one who did not require management. I finished things. I did not generate crises. I had, from an early age, understood that the cost of being reliable was that reliability gets assumed. I studied graphic design at the Pacific Northwest College of Art. I was good at it in the way that people are good at things they understand structurally, not just aesthetically. I knew why something worked, not just that it did, and that distinction had mattered in every job I'd had since graduation. I spent 4 years at a mid-sized branding agency called Strata Creative, working under a creative director named Delia Park, who was exacting and generous in equal measure, and who told me in my 3rd year that I thought about client problems the way an owner thought, not an employee. I had filed that observation away, without responding to it. The thing that Delia noticed was real. I had been thinking for 2 years by the time she said it about what it would mean to work for myself. Not as a fantasy. I am not a person who maintains fantasies, but as a logistical question. What would the first client look like? What the billing structure would be? What I would need in reserve before I could absorb a slow month? I built a spreadsheet. I updated it quarterly. I did not tell anyone about the spreadsheet. Vera, during this same period, had cycled through three significant ventures. The first was an online vintage clothing resale business she had launched in 2017 with $8,000 of her own money and $4,000 she had borrowed from my parents. The loan was later reclassified, in family conversation, as a gift. The business had run for 18 months before the sourcing costs outpaced the margins and Vera had wound it down. The second was a freelance event planning operation she had pursued for about a year before concluding that the clients she could attract at her price point were not the clients she wanted. The third was a ceramic studio she had rented space in for 8 months before the space closed due to a building sale. None of these were failures of effort. Vera worked hard at everything she started. They were failures of the specific kind that happen when the business model is built on enthusiasm rather than margin, and when the people around you have spent years absorbing the shortfall so that the pattern can continue without requiring examination. I had contributed to that absorption in modest ways over the years. A loan of $1,500 for the resale business that I had eventually written off internally without mentioning it, a month of free logo and branding work for the event planning operation, several afternoons helping Vera photograph ceramics for her online shop. I had done these things without resentment and without tracking them because I had not yet done the accounting. The $60,000 request arrived in the context of Vera's fourth venture, a brick-and-mortar home goods boutique she wanted to open in the Alberta Arts District in Northeast Portland. She had found a space. She had a concept. She had a supplier contact she had met at a trade show. What she needed, she said, was startup capital for the lease deposit, the initial inventory, the build-out, the first 3 months of operating costs. She had priced it at $60,000. She had already asked my parents, who had said they could contribute $15,000. She had asked her husband Owen's parents, who had said they would think about it. She was asking me for the balance. She had called me 3 weeks before the kitchen visit to lay the groundwork. She had described the concept in detail, the supplier, the neighborhood, the customer she was picturing. She had said she had done real research this time. She had said she knew the boutique market in Portland. She had texted me a link to a business plan document, which I had opened and read carefully over a Sunday afternoon. The business plan was not without merit. The location was good. The concept had some internal logic. The financial projections, however, were built on a revenue assumption in the first year that required customer volume I thought was optimistic for a new independent boutique in that neighborhood, and the operating cost line did not include a realistic contingency for the lease terms she had described, which had a personal guarantor requirement. I had looked at those numbers for a long time. I had called her back and said I needed more time to think about it. The kitchen visit had been her response to that. I understood, after they left, that the visit had been designed as a closing argument rather than a conversation. The presence of my parents, coordinated, arriving together, my father with his keys still in his hand, was the structure of a verdict, not a discussion. I had been expected to feel the collective weight of it and revise. I stood at my kitchen sink with the cold water running, and I thought about the spreadsheet in the second bedroom. I thought about the LLC certificate in the folder. I thought about the client meeting I had scheduled for the following Thursday for a packaging redesign project with a specialty food company in Eugene that had found me through a referral from Delia Park. The meeting was worth, if it went well, approximately $23,000 in billable work over 4 months. I turned off the water. I dried my hands. I went to the second bedroom and sat at my desk and opened my laptop and did 2 hours of work on a brand identity project for a physical therapy practice in Beaverton. I did not call my parents that evening. I did not call Vera. I did not call anyone. I went to bed at 11 and slept without difficulty, which surprised me less than it might have a year earlier. The holiday ban, as I came to think of it privately, lasted the full first year. Thanksgiving I spent with a friend from college named Yael Grossman, who cooked a turkey that was technically undercooked in one leg and who was excellent company. Christmas I spent alone, which I had always secretly preferred. I worked in the morning, took a long walk in the afternoon, and cooked a proper dinner for myself in the evening. I sent my parents and Vera gifts through the mail. I received nothing in return, which was information. In January of the following year, my father called. He did not apologize or reference the kitchen visit. He asked how I was doing. I said I was doing well. He asked about work. I said work was good. He asked if I was still at Strata. I said no, I had left Strata and was working independently. There was a pause. He said that was a significant change. I said it was. He asked if I was managing. I said yes. He did not ask for details. I did not offer them. The company, by that January, had 3 active clients and trailing 12-month revenue of $187,000. I had hired my first contractor, a production designer named Felix Ochoa, who worked remotely from Seattle and who was fast and accurate, and whose hourly rate was worth every dollar. I had moved my operation from the second bedroom to a small studio office I rented in a converted warehouse space on the east side of Portland. I had a business checking account, a business credit card, and a bookkeeper named Sandra Lim who handled my quarterly filings and who had told me at our first meeting that my records were the cleanest she had seen from a first-year sole proprietorship. I had told none of my family any of this. This was not strategy. It was the same instinct that had kept me quiet about the LLC certificate, a knowledge developed over a lifetime of watching my family organize itself around Vera's projects, that my own work would become subject to that organizing energy the moment it was visible. My parents would have opinions. Vera would have comparisons. The thing I was building required, for the moment, the protection of not being watched. The holiday ban informally ended the second year, when my mother called in October to say she hoped I would come for Thanksgiving. She said it in the tone of someone who has been thinking about making the call for a while and has finally decided the waiting is worse than the conversation. I said I would come. She said good. We talked for 12 minutes about things that had nothing to do with Vera or the kitchen or the $60,000, and I thought that this was, in its way, a kind of progress. Thanksgiving was civil. Vera was there with Owen and their daughter, who was 2.5 and who had strong opinions about which foods were acceptable and was not shy about expressing them. Vera and I were not unfriendly. We were not easy. She asked about my work in the vague way that people ask about things they have decided not to engage with directly, and I said it was going well, and she nodded, and we moved on to other subjects. My father asked, more directly than I expected, whether I was still working independently. I said yes. He said he respected that it took nerve. I said thank you. That was the extent of it. By the third year, the company had 8 employees and a client roster that included 3 regional retail brands, a Pacific Northwest hospitality group, and a national outdoor apparel company that had come to us through a design industry contact I had cultivated at a Portland branding conference. Our trailing 12-month revenue was $1.4 million. I had moved to a proper office suite in the Pearl District. I had a studio manager named Bridget Calloway who handled operations and hiring, and it was Bridget who managed our incoming applications. In March of that third year, Bridget knocked on my office door on a Tuesday morning and set a printed application on my desk. "This one's interesting," she said. Strong visual merchandising background, 2 years of boutique retail management. But the work history has some gaps, and one of the references she listed doesn't have a working phone number. I looked at the application. The name at the top was Vera Adler-Crane. I sat with that for a moment. Bridget was still standing in the doorway. "I know her," I said. Bridget's expression shifted. Not dramatically, just the small recalibration of someone reassessing a situation. "Do you want me to pull it?" "No," I said. "Process it normally. Full review. Same rubric as every other application. Don't tell her we're connected." Bridget said she would handle it. She took the application back and left. I turned to my monitor and looked at the project timeline I had open, a brand refresh for a specialty tea company in Ashland, and I sat with what had just happened. Vera's boutique had opened 18 months after the kitchen visit, with the $15,000 from my parents and an amount from Owen's parents that I later learned was $22,000 and a small business loan she had secured through a local credit union. I had heard about the opening from my mother, not from Vera. I had not attended. The boutique had run for 14 months before Vera had closed it. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, but quietly, with an inventory liquidation sale and a final post on its social media account thanking the community for its support. The lease had had a personal guarantor clause. Owen had signed it. The exit had cost them something, though I did not know the precise amount and had not asked. What I had understood when I heard about the closure was that Vera had tried. She had tried with real effort and real investment, and the boutique had still not worked, and that outcome was harder than a failure of effort would have been because it didn't have a simple cause to point to. The application on Bridget's desk was, I thought, the first time Vera had reached toward something I had built. I did not know if she knew the company was mine. The name, Adler Studio, was findable, but she would have had to look. I did not know if the application was deliberate or coincidental. I did not think it mattered for the purpose of processing it fairly. The review process at Adler Studio was 4 stages: application screen, portfolio review, a structured interview with Bridget, and a final interview with me for senior candidates or roles with client contact. The visual merchandising position Vera had applied for involved client-facing work with our retail brand accounts. It was a senior candidate role. She made it to stage 4. Bridget told me before the final interview that Vera had been strong in the structured interview. Organized, specific about her retail experience, clear about what had and hadn't worked in the boutique. She had been direct about the closure. She had said, when Bridget asked about it, that she had learned more from that 14 months than from anything else she had done professionally, and she named 3 specific things she had learned. Bridget said the answers had been among the more honest she had heard in that chair. I conducted the final interview myself in my office on a Thursday afternoon in April. Vera walked in and saw me behind the desk and stopped moving for approximately 2 seconds. Her face went through something I did not try to name. Then she crossed the room and sat down in the chair across from me. I didn't know, she said. I know, I said. It's all right. Shall we start? She said yes. We ran the full interview. 45 minutes. I asked her the same questions I asked every candidate in that chair, about her decision-making process under competing priorities, about a professional failure and what she had done with it, about how she thought about client relationships in a creative services context. She answered all of them. Her answers were specific and, in several places, better than I had expected. At the end I said I would be in touch within a week. She stood. She picked up her bag. At the door she paused and turned back. The company is good, she said. I looked at the work. It's really good. I said thank you. She left. I sat in my office for a while after she went. Bridget knocked at 4 o'clock to ask if I needed anything before she left for the day. I said no. I did not offer Vera the position. This is the part of the story that people expect to be the climax, the moment where I hand her the job offer as a kind of triumphant reversal, or the moment where I refuse it as a kind of settled score. It was neither of those things. I did not offer her the position because, after reviewing all 4 stages, I determined that the other final candidate, a woman named Priscilla Wayne who had 5 years of visual merchandising experience with 2 regional retail brands and a portfolio that mapped more directly to our client roster, was the stronger hire for the specific role. I called Vera with the decision myself, rather than having Bridget send the standard letter. I'm not extending an offer, I said. The other candidate's background is a closer fit for where the role is going. I wanted to tell you directly. Vera was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I understand. Your answers in the interview were strong, I said. Genuinely. The boutique question especially. Another pause. I've been thinking about that a lot, she said. What I would have done differently. That thinking is worth something, I said. We said goodbye. The call was 4 minutes long. My mother called me the following Sunday. She had heard from Vera. She did not ask me to reverse the decision. She said, after a pause I let run its full length, I didn't know you had built all of this. No, I said. You didn't. Why didn't you tell us? I thought about the honest answer. Because I needed to build it without it being watched, I said. And I needed to know if I could do it before I said out loud that I was trying. My mother was quiet. Then she said, that sounds like you. Yes, I said. It does. The aphorism I keep coming back to in the years since that kitchen evening is this. The work you protect while you are building it is the work that survives long enough to speak for itself. I said no in my kitchen to one thing, and yes, every day for 3 years, to something I had not yet shown anyone. The no and the yes were the same decision. I just had to be in the room long enough for both of them to become clear. If you are watching this, there was a moment in this story, a Thursday afternoon, my own office, a desk between me and my sister, 45 minutes of questions, where I had to choose between what would have felt satisfying and what was actually right. Have you ever been in a room where doing the fair thing and doing the expected thing were not the same? What did you choose? Tell me in the comments. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who is building something quietly. Like and subscribe if you're new. I make these for the people who recognize the long game. Take care of yourselves.